Her name was Anastasia Sterling. Honestly, even her name sounded expensive. She was the sole heir to a global shipping empire, a woman who'd never known a single day of need, struggle, or a day where the word no actually meant anything. She walked into my courtroom less like a defendant facing serious federal fraud charges, and more like a CEO inspecting a branch office. What you're about to hear is a dramatized story. We've created the characters and the specific chain of events for this narrative. It's a story about what happens when blinding wealth and pure arrogance run up against the one thing they can't buy: the law's integrity. And while this particular case might be fictional, it gets at a real troubling truth. The Department of Justice prosecutes dozens of new public corruption cases every single month. On top of that, public confidence in the courts has hit a concerning low, partly because of the feeling that the rich and powerful have a much easier time than regular folks. This story is about one day in my courtroom where that very idea was put to the test. "Every person has a price, Your Honor. I'm just waiting to hear yours." Those were the exact words a powerful heiress said in my courtroom. She had a smirk on her face, totally convinced that her fortune could get her out of a multi-million-dollar fraud conviction. She thought she was untouchable. She believed her money was a skeleton key for any lock, even one that would lead to a gross injustice. She was wrong. And in the next 30 minutes, the only thing her money got her was a front-row seat to her own downfall and a new pair of shiny silver handcuffs. Ice she was about to shut down. Her suit was probably worth more than my car, her posture was perfect, and she wore an expression of bored, condescending amusement. For weeks, we'd been tangled in a complicated trial. The prosecution, led by a sharp assistant U.S. attorney named David Chen, had been carefully laying out their case. They alleged that Anastasia, using a web of shell corporations and forged documents, had defrauded investors out of nearly $80 million. It was a classic story of greed, just dressed up in designer clothes. The evidence against her was a mountain. We're talking emails, bank transfers, and testimony from a former CFO who'd finally decided his conscience was worth more than his bonus. Throughout it all, Anastasia's behavior was just a masterclass in contempt. She'd scroll through her phone, her thumb flicking across the screen with this infuriating casualness. She'd lean over to her high-priced lawyer, Marcus Thorne, and they'd share a quiet laugh, as if the witness on the stand, someone whose life savings she had allegedly evaporated, was just telling a funny story. I gave her several warnings. At first I was subtle, a pointed clearing of my throat, a long, steady gaze. When that didn't work, I spoke to her directly. "Miss Sterling, this is a federal courtroom, not your living room. I suggest you give these proceedings the respect they're owed." She'd offer this sickly sweet, fake apology, a slight dip of her head that was more mockery than respect, and she'd pretend to pay attention for a few minutes. It never lasted. Her arrogance was so thick you could feel it in the room. She saw this whole trial as a little inconvenience that her team of lawyers would eventually make go away. To her, the jury was a bunch of simpletons. The prosecutor was some over-ealist civil servant, and me, well, she saw me as just another guy who could be managed, bypassed, or, if it came down to it, bought. That was her biggest mistake. She believed justice, like everything else in her world, was just for sale. By the third week of the trial, things were decisively turning against her. Prosecutor Chen was brilliant. He could take a ridiculously complex financial scheme and boil it down into a simple, powerful story of lies and theft. He used charts to trace the money from the bank accounts of retirees straight into Anastasia's lavish life: a new yacht, a private jet, a villa in the south of France. He put witnesses on the stand who spoke with raw, heartbreaking honesty about their lives being ruined. An elderly couple who lost everything. A young entrepreneur whose dream business was now bankrupt. With every new piece of evidence, I saw something shift in Anastasia's eyes. It wasn't remorse. It was annoyance, which turned into frustration, and then into a cold, quiet rage. The mask of boredom started to crack. The whispers to her lawyer got more frequent, more agitated. The laughing stopped. She was losing. She knew it. And the world she knew, a world with zero consequences, was starting to fall apart. Her lawyer, Marcus Thorne, was earning his paycheck. He was skilled, cross-examining witnesses with surgical precision, trying to poke holes in their stories. But it was like trying to stop a tidal wave with a bucket. The prosecution's case was just too solid. On the last day of testimony, Chen brought out his star witness, Anastasia's former personal assistant, a young woman named Sarah. Sarah testified that Anastasia had explicitly told her to fake key documents. Then, she produced a secret audio recording she'd made. In the recording, Anastasia's voice was unmistakable, dripping with its usual condescending tone, telling Sarah to get creative with the quarterly reports because the investors were too stupid to know the difference anyway. When that recording played, you could have heard a pin drop. That was the smoking gun. Thorne's objections were weak and procedural. The damage was done. I glanced at the jury. Their faces were grim. Their minds were made up. I looked at Anastasia. The bored's smirk was gone. In its place was a look of pure fury. It was the look of a cornered animal. And as any judge will tell you, cornered animals are the most dangerous. I knew she was about to do something crazy. I just didn't know it would be this crazy. Prosecutor Chen rested his case. I called for a 15-minute recess before closing arguments. Just as I was about to stand, Anastasia Sterling's voice cut through the quiet. "This is a sham." Every head in the room snapped toward her. She was standing, her hands planted on the defense table. Her lawyer, Marcus Thorne, looked like he'd been struck by lightning. He grabbed for her arm, whispering, "Anastasia, sit down. What are you doing?" She pulled away from him, her eyes locked on me. "This whole thing is a sham," she repeated, her voice getting louder, more theatrical. "I came here for justice, but clearly justice in this city has a price. And apparently my offer wasn't high enough." Murmurs erupted in the courtroom. The jury was looking back and forth, completely shocked and confused. I leaned into my microphone, my voice low but firm. "Ms. Sterling, you are out of order. Sit down now, or I'll hold you in contempt." She laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound in the now silent room. "Contempt? You want to talk about contempt? Let's talk about the backroom deals." She took a step away from her lawyer, playing to the whole room now. The jury, the press, everyone. It was pure, calculated chaos. "This trial has been compromised," she announced, pointing a finger right at me. "I have it on good authority that this very judge can be bought. My lawyers told me it was a waste of time, that my business rivals already paid him off to guarantee a guilty verdict." The room exploded. Thorne dropped his face into his hands. Prosecutor Chen shot to his feet, a look of pure outrage on his face. "Objection! Your Honor, this is an unsubstantiated and defamatory attack." But Anastasia wasn't done. She turned her gaze back to me, and that venomous smirk returned. It was then she delivered the line that sealed her fate. "Every person has a price, Your Honor," she said, her voice dripping with poison. "I'm just waiting to hear yours." For a split second, there was just stunned silence. She'd actually done it. She'd detonated a bomb in the middle of her own trial. Her plan was obvious. Create a scandal so huge, so toxic, that I'd be forced to step down. That would trigger a mistrial, buying her months, maybe years, to figure out another escape. It was a monstrous, desperate lie, but for a moment it hung in the air, threatening to poison the very idea of justice in my courtroom. My heart was pounding. In 20 years on the bench, nobody had ever launched such a public attack on my integrity. The anger rising in me was white-hot, but I pushed it down. A judge can't afford public anger. My job isn't to defend my own honor. It's to defend the integrity of the court itself. I banged my gavel, once. The sound cracked through the room. "Silence," I ordered. "Mr. Thorne, control your client, now." Thorne, looking pale and shaken, tried to get Anastasia to sit, but she stood there, rigid and defiant, soaking in the chaos she'd created. I looked over at Prosecutor Chen. The shock on his face was gone, replaced by a quiet, focused intensity. He looked like a man who was ready for this. "Your Honor," Chen said, his voice completely steady, "in light of the defendant's extraordinary allegations, the prosecution has a motion." "Proceed, Mr. Chen," I said, keeping my own voice level. "The government moves to introduce new evidence," quote, he said. "This evidence isn't related to the fraud charges. It relates to a new and separate criminal conspiracy, one we've been actively investigating for the last 48 hours, a conspiracy orchestrated by the defendant, Ms. Anastasia Sterling." A fresh wave of whispers went through the room. Anastasia's smirk finally faltered. What was he talking about? This investigation, Chen continued, his voice getting stronger, is about an attempt by the defendant to obstruct justice, to solicit a bribe, and to defame a sitting federal judge. He looked right at Anastasia. Miss Sterling is right about one thing. Their guas were quiet conversations. But she's the one who was having them. And thankfully, the person she was talking to was an undercover federal agent. All the color drained from Anastasia Sterling's face. Her defiant posture just sagged. Her eyes, wide with panic, darted from Chen to her lawyer, who now looked like he was about to be sick. The trap she'd set for me had just snapped shut on her. The ground beneath her feet, which she always thought was solid rock made of money, had just turned to quicksand. "Mr. Chen," I said, my voice even, "what is this evidence?" "It's an audio recording, Your Honor," he replied, holding up a small digital recorder. "With the court's permission, I'd like to play it." Thorne, finally snapping back to life, jumped up. "Objection, Your Honor, this is an ambush. We've had no discovery on this. This is completely improper." "Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice now cold as steel, "your client just accused me of corruption in open court to force a mistrial. You're right. This improper. What she did is improper. The rules of evidence allow for unforeseen circumstances, and I think a defendant trying to frame the judge qualifies. The objection is overruled. Mr. Chen, play the recording." Chen hit a button, a moment of static, and then Anastasia's voice crystal clear. "The price should be $500,000, she said from the little speaker. "Untraceable. Tell him it's a deposit. He gets the other half after the jury comes back, not guilty." A pause, then a man's voice. "And if he doesn't take it? If the judge is clean?" Anastasia's recorded laugh was chilling. "Oh, please, everyone has a price. But fine, if he wants to play saint, we go to plan B. We ruin him, leak a story to the press, fake some documents showing a transfer to an offshore account. We create the appearance of corruption. He'll have to recuse himself, the case gets thrown out, I walk. It doesn't matter if he's actually corrupt, it only matters if people think he is." The man's voice came back. "So to be clear, you want to first try to bribe Judge Miller. If that fails, you want us to create and spread false evidence to frame him for taking a bribe he actually refused." "Exactly," Anastasia's voice chirped. "He thinks he's above it all. It's time someone taught him a lesson. In my world, you either take the money or you become the cautionary tale. His choice." The recording stopped. The silence that followed was the heaviest thing I've ever felt. It was absolute. Everyone in that room, the jury, the lawyers, the press, just sat there, frozen. They had just heard the raw, unfiltered voice of pure, malicious arrogance. They had heard her plot to bribe a federal judge. And worse, they had heard her plot to destroy an innocent man's life and career just for being honest. I looked at Anastasia. Her face was a mask of sheer horror. The confidence, the entitlement, all of it had just evaporated, leaving behind a pathetic, terrified woman. Her mouth was hanging slightly open, her skin ashen. She was staring at the small recorder on the prosecutor's table like it was a snake that had just bitten her. She had been so sure of her own power, so certain she could bend the world to her will, and in 2 minutes, that entire world had been annihilated by her own words. Prosecutor Chen let the silence hang for a moment before he spoke. His voice was no longer fiery, but heavy with the gravity of what just happened. "Your Honor," he said, "based on that recording and the testimony of the undercover agent, the United States government is now filing a criminal complaint against Anastasia Sterling. The charges are conspiracy to obstruct justice, solicitation of bribery of a public official, and perjury." He gestured to the back of the courtroom. The main doors opened, and 2 U.S. Marshals stepped inside. They walked calmly and deliberately down the center aisle, their eyes fixed on Anastasia. She finally broke. A strangled sob escaped her lips. She spun to Marcus Thorne, her face pleading, "Marcus, do something!" But Thorne was done. He just shook his head, a look of disgust and resignation on his face. He knew he'd been used. He slowly sat down, physically distancing himself from her, leaving her utterly alone. The marshals arrived at the table. One of them spoke, his voice polite but firm. "Miss Sterling, please stand up and place your hands behind your back." She just stared, not comprehending. From untouchable heiress to a common criminal in 30 minutes. "Now, ma'am," the marshal repeated. Slowly, like she was in a dream, she stood. The expensive fabric of her suit crinkled as she brought her arms behind her, and then came the sound. A sound that, for a judge, is the ultimate symbol of justice finally arriving. Click snap of handcuffs. The metallic snap of handcuffs was sharp and final in the dead silent room. Anastasia flinched as the cold steel touched her wrists. A single tear cut a path down her cheek through her perfect makeup. It wasn't a tear of remorse. It was a tear of pure shock. The shock of finally, for the first time in her life, facing a consequence she couldn't buy her way out of. With Anastasia Sterling standing in handcuffs, I addressed the courtroom. My voice needed to be the firm foundation against the chaos she'd tried to create. Given the defendant's direct and egregious actions in this courtroom, I began, my eyes sweeping over everyone, actions that are a direct assault on the very foundation of our justice system. I am hereby declaring a mistrial in the case of the United States versus Anastasia Sterling on the wire fraud charges. A gasp went through the room. A mistrial was what she wanted, but I held up a hand. "Let me be perfectly clear," I continued, my voice sharp. "This is not the win Miss Sterling was hoping for. The fraud charges are not going away. They will be refiled, and a new trial will be scheduled. But her attempt to corrupt these proceedings has made it impossible for me to continue. I am formally recusing myself from the case." I paused, letting that sink in. Then I looked right at the marshals holding a now sobbing Anastasia. However, she isn't going anywhere. She now faces new and, frankly, far more serious charges. Crimes committed against this court and the rule of law itself. A new judge will preside over both the original fraud case and these new, grave offenses. So while justice for her alleged financial crimes is delayed, her reckoning for trying to pervert the justice begins today. I turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your service. I know this has been an unsettling and, frankly, unprecedented event. What you witnessed was a desperate act by someone who believes wealth puts her above the law. Let what you saw next, her immediate arrest, be a clear and resounding message. It does not. No one is above the law. Not the rich, not the powerful, not in this city, and not in this courtroom. You are dismissed." As the jury filed out, their faces a mix of awe and relief, the marshals led Anastasia away. The arrogance was gone. The designer suit now looked like a costume on a woman stripped of her power. She wasn't an heiress anymore. She was just another defendant, her future defined not by her bank account, but by the damning words she spoke so confidently into a hidden microphone. The great equalizer of the justice system had finally and spectacularly done its job. The story of Anastasia Sterling is a dramatic reminder of the constant pressure on our legal system. We see headlines about corruption and hear about powerful people who seem to bend the rules with no problem. But we don't always get to see the moment the system, against all that pressure, actually holds the line. What do you think is the right penalty for someone who not only commits a crime but then tries to destroy the very system meant to judge them? Is a longer prison sentence enough? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. It's a conversation worth having. And if you believe that no one should be above the law and want to see more stories where justice is served, hit that like button and subscribe for more content that holds power to account. In the end, Anastasia Sterling's wealth got her many things: a life of luxury, top-dollar lawyers, and a powerful belief in her own superiority. But it also gave her a fatal blind spot. She couldn't imagine a world where a person's integrity wasn't for sale. She thought the judicial system was just another market to be played, and that a judge's robe was just a uniform worn by someone waiting for a better offer. She was wrong. The courtroom is supposed to be the great equalizer. It's the one place where the size of your bank account shouldn't matter. Only the strength of the evidence does. On that day, in my courtroom, the system worked. The arrogance of incredible wealth crashed into the unmovable wall of the law, and the law won. Anastasia Sterling didn't just lose her case. She lost her freedom, her reputation, and the one thing that truly defined her, the illusion that she was untouchable. And that's a verdict no amount of money can ever appeal.